Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Nazanin Zadeh-Cummings, and while we are joined virtually today, I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people, along with my Deakin University colleague, Dr. Danielle Chubb, and Sheffield University colleague, Dr. Sarah Sun. It is my pleasure to welcome you for this event on human rights and the future of justice in North Korea. I first have the honor of introducing Professor Vanessa Lem, Executive Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Education at Deakin University, for some opening remarks. Vanessa?
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure and delight to be with you today. I want to start by acknowledging and paying my respect to the traditional custodians and elders past and present of the lands on which Deakin University conducts its business, the Wurrung, Wurundjeri and Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations and the Gujamara people. I'm today on Wurrung country and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I want to say a few words of welcome to our special guests. First of all, the Honorable Michael Kirby, a distinguished guest whose achievements and contributions will be well known to those here tonight. During a judicial career spanning more than 3 decades, including more than 10 years as a Justice of the High Court of Australia, Mr. Kirby became a public figure admired by many for his warmth, intellect, and service to the Australian community. As the chair of the United Nations Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Mr. Kirby has ensured that the international community bears witness to the human rights atrocities occurring during the regime. He has been one of the key voices dedicated to ensuring the global community acts on the findings of the UN Commission of Inquiry report and learns the lessons of history. The second speaker I'd like to present is Mr. Timothy Cho. He is an analyst, writer, and advocate. Mr. Cho serves as an inquiry clerk to the United Kingdom's all-party parliamentary group on North Korea, established to formulate solutions that promote and support human rights, democracy, and security in the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, and to establish relations with the exiled North Korean community that foster understanding of the DPRK and the challenges which face its people. Mr. Cho was actually born and raised in North Korea and has been living in the UK since 2008. So on your behalf, I want to begin by thanking Mr. Cho for joining us tonight. This is a very rare occasion for Australian audiences to hear directly from a North Korean SKP. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the sponsors and organizers of today's event. Our thanks also to our partners at the Academy of Korean Studies for their support towards this important event. And to our organizers, Dr. Danielle Chubb and Nazanin Zadeh-Cummings, for their leadership and for bringing us together this evening. The exploration of how the Australian and international communities can support transnational justice on the Korean Peninsula is critically important. We have much to learn from history and from the lived experiences of those who have escaped the regime. I really look forward to our speakers sharing their perspectives with us tonight and the following discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lem. Before handing over to our speakers, I have a few administrative notes. We'll first hear from Timothy Cho and then Michael Kirby. Then we'll have time for a question and answer session moderated by Danielle Chubb. Our audience members are welcomed and in fact encouraged to use the Q&A box to write questions while the speakers are presenting. Please note if your question is directed at a particular speaker. With that, it is now my pleasure to introduce Timothy Cho and welcome him to begin his remarks.
Thank you, and thank you for having this opportunity today with the distinguished people and from Australia and all around the world are watching this event tonight. I'm going to start with someone's story and who I know well about this young boy, North Korean boy who actually first entered the Chinese market after he escaped from North Korea. He faced an awakening moment and almost fainted on the floor. It's because it was full of light and abundant food and different fashions for young people, things that he had never seen in his home country. It was his first experience. He was born in a large prison society. After his parents escaped to China during pestilential famine when he was still a young boy, and from that moment he belongs to hostile class, the group that faces the most discrimination in North Korean society. And his latest education in North Korea was until primary school, despite his brainwashed education, believing the Kims were the best leaders in the world. He grew up without parents and being homeless, and he persevered and survived. He then endured further suffering during his twice escape and 4 times imprisonment. How many of you actually think that boy understood the means of transitional justice? Or how many of you think inside 25 million North Korean people understand transitional justice and accountability? And I also have to ask you this question: what are your current pictures of North Korean people's reaction when they discover the truth of everything was distorted and corrupted in the building of the hermit kingdom? Perhaps we can use these words: hatred, revenge, and killing between oppressors and oppressed may be expected. Even those of 35,000, only 35,000 North Korean escapees who are living in democracies today, both elite and ordinary citizens, live with anger and frustration from losing their families and suffering they had gone through in North Korea and during their escape. 73 years after the formal declaration of the establishment of North Korean government, the country and its leaders continue to confound, confuse, and concern the rest of the world. Not a list of threats of international peace and security with their continuing nuclear development or launching missiles, we have just seen it yesterday, and weapons smuggling into dictators' hands, also equally embracing Stalinist and Maoist communist monarchy steps in economic collapse, hunger and malnutrition, repression, imprisonment, and self-imposed isolation. It's sad to say this, there is a complete information blockade from both inside and outside. People's eyes are closed. They have to pretend to not have seen anything. Their ears are blocked, and choice of hairstyle or fashion is prohibited. And their movement is restricted in every step they walk and requires permissions and travel documents from authorities. Ordinary people don't even know what a passport is, where we can have this privilege to travel from country to country, or have they ever imagined the foreign holidays. It is reasonable when Mr. Hwang Chang-hyuk, you probably recognize him, who was the most high-ranking North Korean defector and crafted North Korean state ideology and religion. We all know this term called juche, which means self-reliance. He said this: from the intellectual standpoint, it can be said without hesitation, the entire country is a large prison. It was inevitable, I have to say, that young boy and oppressed North Korean people hardly understand transitional justice and what it stands for as a truly free democratic society in which all men and women live together in harmony. I'm happy to say this, however, that boy is here today, and he actually stands in front of you on this screen, and he speaks of transitional justice. The past years of my life living in democracy in the UK have helped me to discover who I am and what I love and care about and what I stand for. our democratic constitutional values of freedom of faith, expression, speech, and opportunity. And that opportunity certainly has not only allowed me to go to school, college, universities, obtaining degrees, and revised its democratic functions and systems of checks and balanced society. But most importantly, that opportunity has also unfolded in understanding the systemic victims and victimization of North Korean people. When I was born in this prison society, I didn't know about anything of this. Or you can ask any North Korean people who may understand of this. Universal Declaration Human Rights Article 1 says this: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity. But I have to say this, not in all countries. Maybe in Australia, maybe in the UK, maybe in US, or in other democratic countries may be possible. But when North Koreans are born, and from that day, they are subjected to the dictatorial social contract of suppressed citizenship in North Korean society. From an early brainwashing education, when all children are put in state nurseries and start to be brainwashed about the Kim family, that they should think, speak, and act as the Kims. And this was, of course, my own experience, that they were like my God. I thought they were God. I had to think about them, bow to them, and speak about them every day. I remember this. When first Kim died on 8 July 1994, I asked my father, "Father, are we all going to die because of his death?" And my father replied, "No, we are now follow his son Kim Jong-il." Certainly there is no enough time to think or comparison about whether this was right or wrong. For so long, and from my North Koreans' perspective, North Koreans have suffered oppression, starvation, and imprisonment, torture, enslavement, and fear of life. And it is not surprising that many of them do not even know who they are today and how they ended up living in a suppressed society, very tragical and sad. When I hear North Korean escapes anger and frustration, I feel it. And I understand it, why they have become this way after having gone through all kinds of human rights abuses and persecution and losing families in front of their eyes. Let me ask you this question again, once again. How are we going to deal with millions of North Korean people expressing their anger against their oppressors? This is why this session of understanding of transitional justice and accountability of North Korean people is important. The anger, frustration, hatred, revenge, and killing one another between oppressed and oppressor is one of our repeating historical steps and lessons for many centuries. We're all familiar with this example of the Good Friday Agreement reached Northern Ireland in 1998, where it troubled over 30 years. The IRA bombing and killing took away many beloved family members. What about wars in Yugoslavia? I'm sorry to referring this, many of you who still got that trauma may feel it directly, where it led to ethnic conflicts with a massive human cost and damage split into several states. The pain remains up to today. This is an insightful, which I like it, but I also quite carefully look into these, what Nelson Mandela once expressed. I have fought against white domination. I have fought against Black domination, but I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony. Transitional justice relating to North Korea cannot be a novel idea because it is a faraway distance. We may think it is a quite far distance. We may have to think of something else, but this is not a novel idea. This is imminent in front of our eyes. What is happening right now? It is the living history of trauma and suppressed North Korean people and social classification systems where that classless society they propagate, but into three different classification systems, they have organized the entire people, and discrimination of hostile class people, 3 generations punishment, millions of starvation, hundreds of thousands of homeless children begging food on the streets, what they have done wrong in their lives. Many women and girls are ending up in the Chinese human trafficking industry. They are trapped between these 2 regimes. Who is speaking for them in the meantime? And political and religious prisoners about. And more about millions of families' broken hearts and tears, not just in North Korea, because of division between both in South Korea equally. All damages of pain and trauma for North Korean people are going through right now. It cannot count with any amount of physical money that can reparate. Yes, I have to say it is very, very important to record all these files of abuses and crimes that are happening in North Korea, such as the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights in Seoul. But let's not just ask them to come and explain human rights abuses they experienced in North Korea and say bye to them. This work must or can go efficiently means alongside the process of restoration and preparations. These are historical steps what we are witnessing right now, even some of the countries without preparation, restoration steps, what's happening and bringing furthermore crisis. It can go with educating and equipping North Korean escapees, particularly, I have to say, those of young generations, to train and support them to become leaders, actors, scholars, and businessmen and women. They will learn vital diplomatic and international relational skills of embracing and making a bridge between oppressed and oppressors, such as Nelson Mandela, how he tried to between and one another who trying to kill from hatred and anger, or even that embracing skills will making a bridge between North and South Korea's unification someday. This does not mean the legal process of crimes under international law is delayed. All of this will follow subsequently upon recorded files with the international law, respectively. You may go back to even what was happening during Jewish persecution. Those who even pressed that gas button and millions of Jewish people were killed. And that counted later how it asked, did you know what button you were pressing when the order came from Hitler? I want to say again this, it needs pragmatic, efficient steps to support and work with young North Korean escapees and their creative mind and ideas explore a new Korean society and imagine that no one has to escape again as they did. I cried the day when I crossed the border into China, and until now I can't go back even visit my hometown. I love my country. I love my people. I just can't agree with that dictated government. I hope Australian universities and others who are listening to this may put more efforts into providing available resources of various English diploma and internship courses for young North Korean men and women. Through these steps, they can study at Australian universities and elsewhere, such as establishing reconciliation committee training courses, seminars, lectures, roundtable dialogue, and debate between North and South Korean students, as well as Western students, to harmonize its democratic environment, and they interact globally then. These platforms and environments will give them space to think, explore, interact, discuss, and learn who they are, most importantly, what they love and care about, and what they truly stand for through democracy and the values of a free life. And I also have to mention this, furthermore, it directly links to security issues concerning Australia, who is a major democratic ally and key geopolitical actor in Asian Pacific. Just this morning, we saw UK, US, and Australia bring a new military package together as an ally. And Australia has also been involved in the Korean War. So North Korean issues are not a distant concern. The international community, including Australia, the UK, US, Canada, and France, Germany, and other countries could do more. You have already been doing a lot of work. I appreciate, and we appreciate, but I ask you, could it more to encourage us to explore our ideas and be creative in our approach to North Korea, to see constructive and critical engagement and strategically stand in front of this work, since we are indigenous people, and particularly those who understand and love our home country and people. This can be a short, medium, long-term objective work. But if we are struggling, and if we are not paying attention and how to equip and provide and support these North Korean youngs to become future leaders and actors and citizens of democracies, then we may ask ourselves, how are we going to solve North Korean issues and approach the two Korean integration process? I'm urging you, let's take our role in helping those who are in struggle for freedoms, including North Korea, Afghanistan, and other countries, if we are hard indicating. And if we can donate, please do. If we can write and use social media well, please write on suppression and persecution. And if you can pray, please do pray. And if it's the government, please use government resources. In many ways, we can participate. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who stood against the Jewish persecution a century ago, he once said this: not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. Such work I must compare when almost 1 million East Germans crossed into West Germany in the 1990s. Both Hungary and Austria opened their borders to them. Meanwhile, nobody opens their borders for North Korean escapees without any passport once they cross the border. And they are arrested and repatriated by Chinese authorities and ending up in gulags. Even right now, many North Koreans in Chinese prisons are waiting for their repatriation. Please, let's not forget, these North Korean people are born and living in a prison society, large prison society. Our first steps are to open its prison doors and guide them to the right steps. But from my own experience, from my personal experience in the prison in China and North Korea 4 times, I couldn't open it from inside. We gotta open this door from outside. And one of these processes is as many as Australia and other democratic women and men to join in this transitional justice work of equipping North Korean people and young generation particularly. Please invite them and listen to them, speak to them, and ask them as whose heart towards their loving home country and will be able to embrace and guide and lead their own brothers and sisters into the right path. When this prison door opens, what's the next step is a transitional process towards a new Korea in which all men and women live together in freedom and harmony. And I can't wait for that process. It will come. Someone who once said this: the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy, for those wonderful and moving remarks. I'd like to echo Professor Lem's opening comments on how valuable it is tonight for our audience in Australia, but also all over the world, to hear from you. And I hope that one day we can hear directly from people in Pyongyang on platforms such as this. I'd also like to remind our audience to please use the Q&A box to send questions through. It is now my pleasure to welcome Michael Kirby to share his remarks. Michael, the floor is yours.
I also would like to start by honouring the Indigenous people of Australia who have suffered many great wrongs. Human rights wrongs have occurred in every country, and no country is immune from abuses of human rights. But some countries are very serious offenders against the principles of the Universal Human Rights Declaration of 1948 and the other human rights principles of the United Nations. And the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is amongst the most serious and grave offenders against human rights in the whole world. I would also like to honour Timothy Cho and thank him for his remarks tonight. The authentic experience of people from North Korea who have escaped from that benighted country gives us a voice and gives us an insight into what has happened in North Korea, because the country itself uses every means to try to prevent people getting into their country so that they can report and tell the world of the great wrongs that have happened. In the 1990s and 2000s, many reports came to the Human Rights Commission and then the Human Rights Council of the United Nations of very grave human rights abuses in North Korea. As a consequence, in 2013, the Council, the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, decided that it had had enough, and it decided that it would establish a commission of inquiry. Earlier, it had created the office of the Special Rapporteur on North Korea, but North Korea would not let the Special Rapporteur of the United Nations enter into their country. And then a commission of inquiry was established, and uniquely, it was established without a vote. So exasperated were the countries of the world in the Human Rights Council and determined to find what was going on. The Commission of Inquiry comprised 3 experienced people who had experience in gathering information about human rights abuses. I was asked to be the chair. Previously, I had been the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations for human rights abuses in Cambodia. But nothing in my past experience really prepared me for the task of chairing the COI, the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea. The other 2 members of the commission, very distinguished members, were Marzuki Darusman, former Attorney General of Indonesia, and Sonia Basurko, who was an experienced human rights activist in Serbia. And we 3 constituted the Commission of Inquiry. We met for the first time in July of 2013 in Geneva. And we came from different backgrounds, of different experiences and different legal traditions, but we were united in our common faith in the principles of universal human rights that are stated in the Charter of the United Nations and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and great human rights treaties that the United Nations has established. The Commission of Inquiry resolved that we would undertake our inquiry in full cooperation with North Korea if they would cooperate. But North Korea totally ignored the approaches made by the Commission of Inquiry, and contrary to the resolutions of the Human Rights Council, and the duty of North Korea as a member of the United Nations, they would not cooperate with the work of the Commission of Inquiry. They would not allow us to enter their country, and they simply ignored every attempt we made to gain the truth with their assistance. But that did not stop us. I had by that stage been a judge in my own country, Australia, for 34 years. And the idea that somebody could stop an inquiry simply by not cooperating was absurd and unacceptable. And therefore, we did what would be done in such a case in many countries. We called for witnesses. We made ourselves available. We saw witnesses in Seoul, in the Republic of Korea, in Japan, in Tokyo, in London, in Washington, DC, and in Bangkok. We asked to have the support of countries in the region, and there was a great deal of interest in the inquiry, and there was no difficulty whatsoever in getting witnesses to come forward. Many of them, like Timothy Cho, were people who had fled North Korea and escaped along escape lines in China and found their way out of North Korea. In the case of most of them whom we saw, they were escapees who moved into the Republic of Korea, South Korea, and they gave their testimony with heartfelt evidence, such as Timothy Cho has given to us tonight. In the end, we had to cut off the number of witnesses we could see because we were obliged to report by March 2014. That meant we had little more than half a year to give our report to the Human Rights Council. But we delivered our report unanimously, on time, and discharging all of the 10 items that were committed to us by the Human Rights Council. Those items concerned issues such as the detention of people and of their families in detention camps without proper and effective review of their rights. The absence of food in the case of many people in North Korea. The provision of food is a basic obligation of governments, and it's an obligation that has been neglected by the government of North Korea. The movement of people in travel around their own country and overseas, forbidden by laws and practices in North Korea, unless you're a member of the elite that enjoys special privileges. The right to practice a religion or belief was denied to the people of North Korea. Women's rights were seriously abused, and we had heart-rending stories of women who had sought to escape, had escaped to China, and were then sent back to North Korea under a memorandum of agreement with North Korea, contrary to the principles of the Refugees Convention and Protocol. There was no freedom of political expression or freedom of general expression. The media are severely controlled in North Korea, and there had been many cases of abduction of people from Japan and from other countries, including from Thailand, to serve the purposes of the regime in North Korea. All of these matters were examined by us. The testimony of the witnesses, who it was safe to interview online, were recorded and placed before the world community. They're still before the world community, and the testimony is recorded and available on the internet but not available in North Korea because the internet in North Korea is not available to any but the elite and the people who are close to the ruling regime. And so we delivered our report. The report was received by the Human Rights Council in a very heavy vote in favor of the report. The report was sent to the General Assembly of the United Nations, and likewise, in a very heavy vote of the General Assembly, it was sent from the General Assembly to the Security Council of the United Nations. And the issue of the human rights in North Korea was ultimately placed on the agenda of the Security Council, where it remains to this day. It is very unusual. It had only once before happened in the case of Myanmar, Burma, that the Security Council agreed to put on its agenda issues of fundamental human rights, such as have been the subject of the report of the Commission of Inquiry. After our report, we endeavoured to get North Korea to engage with us. They would not engage with us. They refused to allow us to come back and come to North Korea. We said, you criticise our report, and if you can show that anything in the report is inaccurate, invite us to come to North Korea. And if you establish that the report is in any way unfair or unbalanced, we will correct it. But those requests were totally ignored. And the result of this is that the international community has before it a recalcitrant country, North Korea, which is a member of the United Nations, which is defying the organs of the United Nations. It cooperates very poorly with the Human Rights Council in responding to the Universal Periodic Review that the Human Rights Council conducts. It is very uncooperative with the High Commissioner of Human Rights in dealing with the many issues of human rights that arise and are the subject of investigation by the Special Rapporteur and by the Commission of Inquiry. The United Nations has endeavoured to get further truth. It has established a field office in South Korea, the Republic of Korea, and that field office continues to gather testimony from those people who can escape and who give testimony of what they have seen and what they have witnessed. Testimony bringing their experience and their sufferings to the notice of the United Nations. At least, at the very least, the report of the COI has allowed a lot of people to speak truth to power, as Mr. Timothy Cho has done tonight. So what can be done? In 2018, Donald Trump, as President of the United States, tried to open up a dialogue with Kim Jong-un, the Supreme Leader. And at the time, I hoped that this might provide a new start and a new opportunity. But unfortunately, Mr. Trump did not mention the issues of human rights. He was mainly focused on nuclear weapons, which North Korea has developed, contrary to the principles of the Non-Proliferation Treaty of the United Nations, of which North Korea used to be a party. And North Korea is reportedly in possession of about 30 nuclear weapons. And as recently as last Sunday, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the 11th of September attack on the United States, choosing that symbolic day to flex its muscles and assert its power, it fired ballistic missiles, which it has also been developing. It does not speak of human rights. It speaks of brute power and cruel weapons and cruelty to its own people. And this is a problem which we have to solve. How can we solve it? We don't have United Nations blue helmets who can walk into North Korea and force that country to conform to universal human rights. We must continue dialogue with that country. We must continue bringing the message of the Commission of Inquiry's report to North Korea. We must never let up in drawing the attention of the great wrongs that have happened, including wrongs to the people who've been abducted by North Korea, contrary to all the principles of universal human rights and of international law. And this is what we must do, and we must continue to do it, and we must not give up. We must ensure that we continue to bring this matter to attention. There is some indication that access to the internet, which will be a liberator to North Korea, is happening to some extent. And international news media are opening and increasing their transmitters and their voice into the people of North Korea. They have a right to know, and we must make every effort in our societies to bring the truth of North Korea to the people of North Korea, and we can do that using the modern means of communication. Those modern means of communication are forbidden and controlled in North Korea, but the appetite of the people of North Korea, the young people of North Korea, really want to have news and information about the world they live in. And we must do everything we can to bring that information and the great wrongs that are revealed in the COR report to their notice. They have human rights and they are being denied their human rights. The human rights principles assert that where there are crimes against humanity and the country concerned does not correct those crimes against humanity and give redress, it is the duty of the international community to give redress, and that duty remains unfulfilled. I hope that Australia and other countries will continue to press for action, not only on nuclear weapons, though that is also a human rights issue, but also on the matters that are revealed in the Commission of Inquiry report. And we must never give up, and we must never stop speaking of the abuses of human rights, and we must ensure that our leaders do so also, so that we will live to see the wrongs that are revealed in North Korea corrected, and those who are responsible made accountable for those wrongs. I thank Deakin University, and I thank Danielle Cho for her untiring work for human rights issues to be considered by scholars and by the intellectual community. We need more people talking about these issues. They have not gone away, and scholars have an independent duty to bring them to the notice of the world community, and we should ensure that that continues to happen. So thank you to Deakin, thank you for Danielle, thank you to Timothy Cho, my respects to the people of Korea, and especially to the people of North Korea. All persons are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That was a lesson I learned in my primary school, and it has remained with me ever since. And one day, soon we hope, it will be realized in North Korea.
Thank you so much, Michael and Timothy, for sharing your thoughts with us today. It's really, I think, a rare opportunity, as Nazanin said, as Professor Lem said earlier, to hear from both of you on these issues, particularly, I think, for Australians to be able to hear from a North Korean. Usually these talks are not in time zones that are friendly to us, so we really appreciate you, Timothy. And thank you, Michael, to you for all your hard work. The Commission of Inquiry report was such an important landmark in the way the international community thinks and talks about human rights in North Korea. When I started studying this as a scholar 15 years ago now, and particularly studying the role that human rights activists, so just everyday people, play in trying to get states to think about human rights, it was a really niche issue. It was an unusual thing to look at. And I don't think we can say that anymore. And that is, I think, largely to do with the work of people like Timothy and also the work of the UN Commission of Inquiry. So thank you to you both. We have some questions from the audience, and feel free, everyone, to put your questions in the Q&A box. Only we can see them, so don't be shy. We've got a few really great ones so far. There's two on sanctions that I'm going to combine together and ask of both of you, because they're not directed at anyone. And both questions ask, talk about how sanctions seem to have been used. It's one of the few tools the international community has to put pressure on North Korea. And the questions are, firstly, could relaxing sanctions open up more opportunities to engage with North Korea, including on human rights? And there was also, related to that question of sanctions, the question of whether it's affecting food prices and the everyday lives of North Koreans, and what you might think about the international community's obligations, I guess, in that regards. So maybe I'll give Michael a break, because he just spoke, and go straight to Timothy first, if that's okay.
Yes, Timothy, you go first.
I think you're more expert from international community's perspective. Please go first, Mr. Michael Kirby, if that's okay with you.
Yes, well, first of all, sanctions effectively require action by the Security Council. And as I have said, the Security Council placed the issues of human rights on its agenda in 2014. And that issue is still there. There has been a debate about the issue every year in the General Assembly and on many years in the Security Council. Following the change of administration in the Republic of Korea, South Korea, President Moon Jae-in decided that he would adopt a different strategy, and he would try to reach out and reach some consensus and agreement with North Korea. This was a sensible strategy to adopt. But the result of that strategy has been really a slap on the face of North Korea, by North Korea to South Korea. It has not taken steps to increase the dialogue. It has not allowed the United Nations officials to come in. And the result of the outreach was that the issue of the Security Council during that period, it did not approve of the consideration of the issues of human rights in North Korea on Human Rights Day, as it had in previous years, because at different phases, the Republic of Korea did not vote for it, and the United States of America did not vote for it. I'm hoping that these recent developments, including the missile launch this very week, will lead to reconsideration of the importance of having dialogue about human rights as well as nuclear weapons. We will not have nuclear peace and security on the Korean Peninsula if we don't deal with the human rights issues. And therefore, I think this is something that is urgent, and I hope it will be dealt with by the new administration in the United States and by the Moon administration in Republic of Korea. We should not write off the taking of action by the Security Council. After all, in response to the nuclear proliferation by North Korea, the Security Council imposed sanctions on North Korea. That would have required, being a substantive and not a procedural matter, the vote, a concurring vote of the Russian Federation and of the People's Republic of China. So when you go into that beautiful room in the United Nations, which is the Security Council room, and you look at the horseshoe-shaped table, and you look at the 15 human beings who sit there, you realize that they have a special responsibility. And we have to try to ensure that they realize this special responsibility and the great danger that is presented to the world by the situation in North Korea. I am not without hope that that will happen. Never forget that the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China share borders with North Korea, and they would be immediately affected if North Korea were to take steps that were damaging to their neighbours. So I hope that we're going to see something happen, that the new Biden administration will put human rights back onto the agenda, that the Moon administration will realise that it has to be dealt with in a package that deals with human rights and nuclear weapons. And I hope that all of this will come to pass, and quickly, because time is not in favour of failing to act both on nuclear weapons and on human rights in North Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. That was very professional answers. I don't know what I can add. However, from North Korean's perspective, what I would like to add is, I must ask everyone, is North Korea's nuclear weapon is for the people of North Korea or for the Hermit Kingdom, or to protect the totalitarian regime and government? And this sanction, and this certainly in many ways affect, but with even sanctions, I think we can continue to engage with the human right, the humanitarian interactions and assessment and work. What I particularly from North Korean perspective is, each nuclear weapon, and we all probably know how much cost they spend on it, is at least $800 million US. And while there are hundreds, thousands of kids and even young children, they are in malnutrition and hunger and begging food, and people haven't got enough food particularly. And what's the primary responsibility? I think in the question box, I saw someone mention the R2P, responsible to protect. We got to ask the state primary responsibility, whether the state has failed or protect their own citizens from starvation, oppression, and persecution. And my answer is clear. And this nuclear weapon is not for the people of North Korea, but it is for the most of, probably we could say, totalitarian state and government or dictatorship. What is in their personal interest, they need to, what it means, as long as they want to live with this weapon to defend by themselves rather than for the people.
Thank you so much. We have lots of great questions coming in, so we'll try and get through as many as we can, and apologies if we don't get to your question. It's wonderful though to see such a big interest from the audience. We have a question from Georgia who asks, from an individual perspective, I think she asks, what, if any, practical actions can individual citizens or anyone who doesn't have any kind of professional involvement, doesn't work day to day on North Korea, what can they do to help North Korean citizens facing human rights abuses, and how can individuals make a difference in the lives of North Koreans? Hard question, but I'll go to you, Timothy, first, as the only North Korean in the room.
Thank you. Well, I actually go and speak to many people at the church, conference, government, and around, and even including students. And many of them actually have asked this question. But it is quite, it's not something has to be professional. And having said, these days we have great technology, social media can use. We got to make this language of soundbite of the persecution or oppression and human rights abuses, crimes against humanity happening in North Korea. When was it? Was it this year, January? One of the human rights organizations called Open Doors, human rights religious persecution organization. They listed 50 countries of the figures of people are being persecuted on a daily basis. And how many was that? 340 million. Probably they could be more. That's the least number they figured. And North Korea is on the number one rank for how many years? 20 years. But I have to go back to even before 20 years. This is 20 years comes the data because of North Korean escapees, people able to escape from 1990s up to millions of starvation. And that language is simply having, I mentioned in my speech, if we can write or if we can use social media, where please spread the word and share with your friends, families, and church, and go to colleagues. And that we make this as far as it can go of soundbite language. I think that certainly many just general people and even high school students who they can even write letter to their own MP to ask, can you please bring this motion and debate in your government? Just bring up this attention. That is, everyone can do that as a democratic citizen. Maybe this person as well, I'm glad he's asking this question. And he could, after this event, he could write just 100 words to his MP or her MP. Would you please take an action or bring a motion to talk about this issue happening in North Korea? And there are many things. And I'm so glad that you come on this way and asking how we can do as ordinarily every day. If you are someone who have faith in religion, obviously you can also pray, you can support, you can use social media. There are in many ways we can participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. And I'm sure that they will do that as well. That's really good and practical advice. Did you want to add anything to that, Michael, or should we go on to the next question?
Well, I'd only add that the Australian Foreign Minister and Defence Minister went this week to Seoul and had dialogue with their counterparts in Seoul. And I think it may be important for Australians to write to their ministers and to try to ensure that the strong stands that Australia took in supporting the work of the COI and the ongoing work of the field office in Seoul will continue and will have the support of the government of the Republic of Korea. Because unless it secures the support of the Republic of Korea, the likelihood is that, especially with the pressure of urgent tasks of COVID and other international issues, climate change and so on, the urgent issues of North Korea will go to the bottom of the pile, and that is not the right place for them to be.
I think perhaps not necessarily directly related to that, but on the same, I guess, line of thinking about the role of the international community, there are actually two questions about the responsibility to protect, asking whether that is a doctrine that is relevant. So one person, you touched on this earlier, I think, Michael, but I'm curious if you can offer your opinion on what you think it's going to take for the international community to take actions that extend beyond sanctions.
Well, one thing that could be done by the international community would be if the Security Council were persuaded that the situation on nuclear weapons, but also on human rights issues, warranted the referral of the matter exceptionally to the International Criminal Court. This is something that the Commission of Inquiry urged should be done, and it has been done on 2 occasions. The Security Council has taken steps in respect of Libya and in respect of Darfur, but not so far in respect of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. A point will probably be reached where the intransigence of North Korea and the failure to take steps that the international community believes is essential for the peace, security, and human rights of the whole world, that something will need to be done. And jumping up and down and insisting and demanding it is not going to make it happen. What's going to make it happen is a conviction on the part of the members of the Security Council and of the General Assembly and of the Human Rights Council that this is a really urgent and dangerous situation. And keep in mind, please, that if we do not deal with North Korea on the issues of human rights and nuclear weapons, then what will happen to the next country that comes along and develops nuclear weapons and says, behind my walls, I can do what I like? That is completely contrary to the principles of universal human rights. North Korea did not have to become a member of the United Nations, but it did become a member of the United Nations. It has obligations as a member of the United Nations, and ultimately it will be the duty of the P5 members, the permanent members, to ensure that those obligations are carried out, because otherwise North Korea will remain and increasingly be a great danger to the international community and to the cause of peace.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. If I may just add one point from North Korean's perspective, I think there are a number of available some young North Korean people these days who are in the UK and South Korea and US and anywhere else. Perhaps in the policy setting discussions, I very hope they might bring them and to participate in this conversation when new settings on North Korea. One of the German education minister, not long after that German united, he made these 2 comments. 2 things we learned from our German unification process was, first, it was very too quick process. It was unexpected. Something was very rapidly happened. And second one was we ignored as many as East German people, including those who were educated and who were able to provide advice and some policy settings to be in the quick way of Germany could settle down. So I think Korean and North Korean situation, of course, there can be not many elites, although we have a few former elites, including Mr. Che and also another South Korean assembly. 2 of them are now in there. But there are quietly also working from back of the stage who are in the US, South Korea, and UK and Germany as well. Some of these people could provide a lot of contribution setting on this policy, because that's tools for our country and people. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for probably one more question. And there's a question I think is really important because it comes up a lot. And as we know, veracity and truth is the most important tool that North Koreans have when it comes to having their claims heard, I guess, by the international community. So this question is asking about how we can, given the lack of transparency in North Korea, how we can trust information about North Korea when it's very difficult to verify the claims made by North Koreans, and rumors are often misreported in the international media. So people ask, how can audiences trust information about the DPRK when relying largely on past witness testimony, given that outsiders lack access to verify the information? I'm sure this is a question you've had before, Timothy.
Thank you for asking that very important question. It is very important to discuss about this actually. But there is phrase in Korea: if you don't make a fire, and there is no smoke going out through the chimney. So without a list of these, there may be some, maybe sometimes maybe happening, or maybe some unintentionally, or some people too painful of this to share everything. So each time share in a different way, that may bring kind of a little confuse as well outside the audiences. But you must think about when this person wants to share or doesn't want to share or cannot share, there must be a lot of reasons of pain and tragedy they have gone through. I have not mentioned what I experienced when I was in North Korean prison. I could tell you one thing: North Korea has the most moderate prison and torture system in the world. And these things, ask many people who would like to share some of these things. They may share time to time when they are ready. So you have to wait instead of force them or ask them to respond quickly that you want. But when the time is come, they share, they willing to. And ask about whether that story can be true or not. But think about a list of things where they want in this prison society, because we cannot see this society inside what is happening right now. But I am already predicting when the door opens, how many tragic stories we will have to write. And journalists will have no time and space to carry on this work for how long, and how many graves you will find. And this was happened after the Second World War. And Mr. Michael Kirby and his fantastic COR report, which we are so grateful to, this report made this language internationally possible. And he has the report mentioned North Korea's abuse and crimes against humanity, 21st century's Holocaust. And when they sometimes don't want to share, cannot share, or they will share next time, that doesn't mean his story or her story is wrong or something mistaken. But there must be sometimes reasons why they can't, they don't, they may not. Or maybe some others, they may add up, but at least there's upon that basic and true fact what are happening in North Korea right now. Thank you.
Michael, did you want to speak on that? I know that witness credibility is something obviously you've thought about your whole career and was a very important part of your work in the COI.
The methodology of the COI was very carefully thought out. We were dealing with a very secretive country, and the best way to deal with it, we all agreed, was to be totally transparent, to encourage the voices of those who had suffered to come forward, and to put the transcripts and the testimony, the oral testimony online, and they are still there and people can still see them, and they challenge the international community, and they won't go away. They will continue to be a clarion call for action. Now, I mainly feel very sorry, and I feel great love for the people of North Korea. I don't hate the people of North Korea. I love the people of North Korea. I'm concerned to the extent that sanctions prevent food and medicines and other essential goods getting to North Korea. But they are spending huge amounts on their nuclear stockpile, and they are ignoring their duty to respond to the crimes against humanity. So this is the quandary, and the quandary has to be addressed by the international community. The worst decision would be to forget about North Korea, to say it's too complicated, it's extremely dangerous, There are nuclear weapons. We just have to hope that nothing terrible happens and leave them alone. That is not the way of the Charter. It is not the way of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have to continue to lift our voices. We have to listen to the voices of those who escaped from North Korea. We have to hope that in South Korea, a country of great diversity, of wealth and of technical skills, that they become a clarion call for equality, justice and human rights and the rule of law for their brothers and sisters, cousins and grandfathers in the North. And we have to encourage this and never give up. Winston Churchill, facing very difficult times in England, went back to the motto of his school, which was Harrow School in England, Harrow. And Harrow had a motto, never give up, never give up, never give up. And that is what we have to do with North Korea. We have to keep the voices coming and make them louder and bring them into North Korea and make sure that the world does not turn away and forget the people of North Korea like Timothy Cho.
Thank you so much. I think that's a wonderful point on which to end. Thank you again. We're so humbled and honoured to be joined by both Timothy and Michael, two individuals who come to this topic from completely different backgrounds, but as you can hear tonight, have both got really important and valuable perspectives on this question of how to think about and talk about and act on the human rights situation in North Korea, which is not an easy one. There's so many pitfalls and problems, but as Michael has just so clearly said, the worst thing we can do is just put it in the too hard basket. So thank you so much for sharing your stories, Timothy, for sharing your experience, Michael. Thank you to my colleagues, Nazanin and Sarah, behind the scenes, helping me find the questions and direct them to our speakers. And thank you mostly to all of you for coming tonight, for giving up an hour on your Thursday night to join us. And I hope that you take away from this some important insights and have learned something and tell your friends about our wonderful speakers. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.